C Group that's sponsoring the event today. This is part of our Getting to Zero series, and you may have sat in on one of the first two series. We started with the envelope, and then we talked about windows, and today we're going to dive into solar. C-Free stands for carbon-free residential, everything electric, and we are a working group for the Green Energy Committee. And let's see. This is the Getting to Zero series. We did the envelope on February 21st. And by the way, these presentations are all on our website if you'd like to go back and listen to them. Upgrading your windows on February 28th. Today, we're talking about solar with Roy Van Cleef from New England Clean Energy. Retrofit of the historical home will be offered on March 30th. So many of us that live in Lincoln live in older homes. And so FOMA has partnered with us to talk about architectural design of the homes and preserving some of that design as you retrofit your home. We haven't set a date yet for heat pumps, but that will be in April. And then we're going to do a couple of sessions that talk about just living green and clean. What else can you do to live more sustainably? And not part of this series, but we don't want you to forget, is our electric vehicle show on July 4th. So that's coming. So today I'd like to introduce Roy Van Cleef, and he's the manager of sales with New England Clean Energy. New England Clean Energy is based out of Hudson, Massachusetts, and services New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. They've been installing solar electric systems since 2006, and Roy has been with the company since 2011. If you heard Roy talk, he's got an accent, and that's because he's from South Africa. He went to school at Aberdeen University in Scotland and came to the United States as an exchange student to the University of Oregon. He officially moved to Massachusetts in 2004, and he lives in Harvard, Massachusetts with his wife and 3 children. When he is not talking about solar, which he does like to talk about, he likes to run ultra marathons. So Roy, with that, I'm going to let you take the screen and get us started on solar.
Well, thanks very much, Colette. That was quite an introduction. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting for me. As you said, I love talking about solar, and I've been doing this, designing and installing systems for 12 years in Massachusetts now. So I've learned a bit. All right, let me see if I know how to use a computer and see if I can hijack the screen share. All right, did that, everyone see the screen? Okay, great. I think, Colette, is the best way to do this, just to run through the presentation and then take all the questions at the end?
Yeah, if that's most comfortable to you, go for it.
Yep, so everyone just, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. I know Edwina already had a couple. Just write them down. I'd be happy to spend at least the second half going through all of your questions if this presentation does not answer that. So just from a broad overview, you've got your own reasons for going solar. Why do people do it? The 2 main reasons are to save money on their electricity bills and to help the environment use less fossil fuels, or a combination of the 2 of those things. But before we go any further, I want to spend some time talking about and clarifying the difference between kilowatts and kilowatt hours, because we're going to talk more about that later in the presentation and get a better understanding of what those terms mean. Basically, a kilowatt is 1,000 watts, and it's a measure of how much power a device uses. For example, a light bulb is 6 watts. A hairdryer is probably around 1,000 watts. A wall oven might be 3,000 or 4,000 watts. And then a kilowatt hour is the measure, the amount of energy that something uses over time. So to take that analogy with the hairdryer, let's say it uses 1,000 watts. You dry your hair for an hour a day, every day for a month. You would have used 30 kilowatt hours over that month to dry your hair. Don't feel guilty about it. The typical home uses about 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. But this is a broad range. If you use heat pumps and things like that, it could be much higher. Generally, we see little spikes in the summer months for air conditioning or pools. And generally, we see little spikes in the winter months, especially if you're heating with electricity, but anything that uses a heating element. But what we've seen in the last few years is a shift to become more electrified. And I saw that in some of Colette's other presentations. Homes are becoming more electric as people attempt to get more off fossil fuels. So things like installing a geothermal system, an air source heat pump, or a mini split to replace your existing old fossil fuel heating with an electric heating source. And also people are buying electric cars and installing chargers and charging at home. So that can increase their usage, but reduce fossil fuels. Induction cooktops, I heard Edwina talk about that. And then heat pump water heaters, as opposed to using oil or natural gas to heat up your domestic hot water, is a good replacement. So we see new construction especially is nearly all electric, but more and more older houses are making the shift and replacing those older fossil fuel burning appliances to more electric appliances. But that does increase the number of kilowatt hours you're going to use. Some things to consider in terms of panel installation, what I look at, and what I think most installers should look at, the main thing being shading. How much sun exposure does your roof get? We'll go into more detail later. The azimuth and slope of the roof, which way is it pointing, northeast, southwest, and how steep is your roof, and how much roof space do you have available? Is it a huge, beautiful southern exposure, or is it broken up with skylights and vent pipes and dormers? And then what's your appetite? How much electricity do you use now, or do you think you're going to use in the future? So to design your system to future-proof what you think you're going to use. And then the roof surface obviously is important as well. Probably 90% of the roofs we do are asphalt shingles, but you might have a rubber roof if it's lower pitched. You might have a metal standing seam or metal shingle roof. You might have cedar or slate, which are very tricky to install on. So that's also a consideration as well. We'll go deeper into the shading thing. How much shading is too much? It's difficult to quantify. The more shading you get, less kilowatt hours your system's going to produce per panel or per kilowatt installed. But generally, as a rough rule of thumb, if you stand outside and hold your arms out at a right angle facing due south, you want to see your roof be shade-free between 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But again, that's a really rough generalization. If you're 10 to 2, it could still work for you. You'll get less production. Your payback might be a little bit longer. But generally, they are solar panels. They need sun. So the more sun you get on your roof, the better. And then other things I mentioned earlier, vent pipes. If you get the panels too close to those, they could cast a shadow throughout the course of the day. Dormers, skylights, and other roof surfaces might cast some shadows as well. Just an example of 2 roofs that I just pulled up online during the same time of day. This one due south exposure, both due south facing. Both of them, this one on the left has very little shading. The one on the right obviously has a big shadow on it. So good roof versus not so good roof. In terms of azimuth, which ways the roof is facing, We're in the Northern Hemisphere. South for a fixed array is the most ideal. East and West can work as well. You lose a little bit of production. And generally, if you're East-West facing, a lower pitch is better than a steeper pitch. North, I'm not going to rule it out completely. I know in the past, people say, oh, whatever you do, don't do a north-facing roof. You might still get 50% relative to a south-facing roof. So we'll talk about payback later. But on a beautiful site with high electricity bills, people might see a 6-year payback. So maybe on a north-facing roof, you see a 12-year payback. Is that still acceptable? It's still making kilowatt hours. It's just not ideal. So south-facing is the best. And then the pitch of the roof. Steeper pitch is obviously going to shed snow, so it's going to work better in the winter. And it's also more perpendicular to the lower winter sun in the sky. So you might see a more even production over the course of the year. The summer and winter production might be fairly similar, whereas a more gentle pitch, a roof you wouldn't mind walking on if you weren't scared of heights, is going to favor summer production. Other things, and I heard this coming up with Colette as well, a lot of older houses in Lincoln. So 2 things, how old is the house and how old is the roof? If the roof is going to need to be replaced, that's a consideration because there is some substantial cost associated with someone coming out, pulling solar panels off while you reshingle the roof and then put the solar panels back on. There's no hard, fast rules here, but in my mind, I generally tell people if the roof is less than 15 years old, go for it. If it's older than that, consider replacing the roof now. It's more cost up front, but then you don't have to touch it or deal with it for the next 25, 30 years. When we talk about older houses, we're more concerned about the structure itself. So we do work with a structural engineer, other installers should, I think, do too. But basically, we're looking at a time when the houses were built, the building code was more relaxed or non-existent. And so we work with a structural engineer to make sure the roof can support that. If your house is pre-1980 and it has 2x6s up there in the attic, you might need some roof reinforcing. So that could add to the cost of the project. Doesn't rule it out completely, just means you might need some roof reinforcing. Obviously, if that roof is a finished roof, so there's no attic space available, it's very hard to reinforce. So you're becoming more of a construction project at that point. And then just general recommendations. Sounds like you've got a really good green committee and community in Lincoln there. Check with people who have solar or online Facebook groups, Nextdoor if you have that, and chat with your neighbors who installed their systems. Did they have a good experience? So check around, look at reviews online. So do your due diligence. I didn't know whether I'd have some online access, so I did a little recording. So basically, we use online modeling tools to predict production of certain areas of roof. So let me see if I can get this working, and I'll let Roy take it away. Is the sound coming through on the video?
No.
No.
Okay. That's my first issue. So I could just repeat what I'm saying as the video goes. So this is an online modeling tool we use to create a 3-dimensional model of your home. And we can pair it with Google and Bing and other satellite images to create that 3-dimensional model. So then we can locate the panels on the roof, and then we take it a step further and we use something called LiDAR. light detection, and it detects the heights of certain obstructions around your property. So for example, there's a big tree to the south of this property, and the red shows that it's quite tall. There's some trees to the west. And then this is color-coded to show how well each roof surface performs relative to a perfect site. So the brighter orange says that southeast facing side produces quite well. That northeast, it's a little darker purple, not as good. And then the lower roof has some shading that's taken into account using that. And so if your installer has access to this software, they can design your roof online and show you how well certain roof surfaces will perform, taking into account physical shading using that LiDAR and then tilt and orientation. So in this case, the southeast is pretty good. Southwest is all right. You start to get some shading towards these trees here. Obviously, nothing on the northwest facing side. It's a really dark purple, gets a lot of shadow. But they decided they just wanted a little bit extra production, so they did some on the northeast facing side. To dive into the equipment a little bit, we'll talk about the two main components. Basically, the solar panels. Everyone loves talking about the solar panels because they're the sexy part of the system that converts sunlight into electricity. Installers are using roughly 400-watt panels these days. If people on this Zoom call have older systems, you might have a lower wattage panel. Efficiency has been creeping up over the years, but it's about 20 to 22%. The size of the panels, if you just want to size things up on your own roof and see how much roof space you have available, they're quite big. They're about 6 foot tall by 3.5 feet wide. And the main change, honestly, in the last few years, it's not a technology change. They've been using silicon and solar panels for 70 years now. It's been an aesthetic change. You'll see the older panels have a, excuse me, more of a silver colored aluminum frame, whereas the current modules residentially have a black anodized aluminum frame, and then they use a black backsheet as well, so you don't see the solar cells as much. So it's mostly been an aesthetic change in the industry in the last 10 years. And as Belinda mentioned when we kick things off, most panels have a 25-year manufacturing warranty. A lot of panels will also have a production warranty where they're basically guaranteeing the production of the panel over time. Some will have a 10, some will have a 15. Better ones will have a 25-year production warranty. And then the end point, are they producing 86, 90, 92%? Are they rated year one output 25 years from now? So it's basically the degradation of the panel over that 25-year period. And some of the top panel manufacturers will carry that a step further and have a 25-year labor warranty. So they actually give us a little bit of money to go out and replace a panel should anything go wrong. But honestly, the panel failure rate is very, very low. They're very durable. The inverters are more the brains behind the scenes. They convert panels, produce electricity in DC, and that needs to be converted to AC that your house can use. You got a couple of different ways of doing this. You've got microinverters, you've got string inverters with optimizers, and you've got traditional string inverters. Not many residential installers are still using traditional string inverters. A microinverter means that each panel has its own designated inverter mounted on the back of the panel, on the rack underneath the panel. And so each panel will be completely independent of every other panel in the system. So if you had a 20 panel system up there, it'd be like having 20 individual solar systems up on your roof. And as you can see from the monitoring, it's just a screen capture of one of our monitoring tools. Each panel works completely independent, and you can pinpoint how well each panel is producing. And monitoring is generally through the whichever inverter you happen to have installed on your site. Another thing I see a lot of residential installers do is the string inverter with the optimizer. So a traditional string inverter will take multiple panels, 10 to 20 panels, and string them together in series, which is fine in larger commercial applications, but on residents where you might get some shading or mismatch, it could pull down the production of the whole string. So you're not getting full efficiency. Basically, the panels are working as well as the weakest panel in the link. But optimizers sort of overcome that, and each panel is optimized with a device on the back, but that optimizer doesn't do the DC to AC conversion. It still comes down DC to a main inverter. And the two main companies out there are Enphase that do the microinverters and SolarEdge that do the inverter optimizer combination. That's getting a little bit technical, but I know there's a lot of technical people in Lincoln, and there might be some questions. I think this is the most important part. How do you connect solar to your home, to the grid? So it's best to understand how it works now. And we talked a lot about kilowatt hours, and I'm going to review a sample bill with everyone so they can put it into context. But basically, you've got a glass or plastic meter on the outside of your house. It's like an odometer in a car. It's constantly measuring energy coming into the house that gets delivered from Eversource to your home every time you turn on an appliance, and you get charged by Eversource for every kilowatt hour you use in the home. And then you get billed each month at a specific rate for those kilowatt hours that you use. When you add solar panels to your home, you're eligible to get net metering. So it basically means that on a bright sunny day like today, the solar panels on your roof, they're producing power, they're producing kilowatt hours that are feeding through the house. And excess power goes back out through that meter back to Eversource. And your meter physically spins backwards. Bright sunny day, it spins backwards. At night, when your solar's not doing anything, it spins forwards. So it'll constantly cycle forwards and backwards. But now at the end of the billing cycle, you get billed on your net usage. For example, you use 1,000, but your solar generates 800, you get billed on 200, or the difference. If you're lucky enough to produce more than you use over the billing cycle, so you produce 1,000 kilowatt hours, but you only use 800, you get a credit for your excess production, and Eversource will calculate that credit for you. It's not quite retail, but it's really close, and there are exceptions here, and we can talk about that in more detail, but it's about 90 cents on the dollar. So if you're currently paying 32 cents a kilowatt hour for your electricity, adding up all those charges, your credit would be about 29 cents a kilowatt hour. And it details how they calculate that there. It's basically number of kilowatt hours multiplied by the supply, distribution, transmission, and transition charges. Again, that's getting into the weeds a little bit. That credit, dollar value credit, will appear on your bill and will roll over to the following month. If you don't use it that month, it'll roll over again. So roll over, roll over, roll over. So you could be in a situation where you're generating credits in the summer months that you carry into the winter, and it offsets your winter usage when your solar production is lower. You also have the option to allocate that credit to another Eversource account if they're in the same load zone. Again, we can talk about that in more detail, but I just wanted to give you a broad overview of how it works. So here's a sample electric bill. And people often want to know, well, how does it work? And I know no one really wants to look at their electric bill. It's painful and it's complicated. So in this instance, this box, you see my mouse, or am I just pointing to space? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Colette. So this box represents, you'd have a meter number there, and here's the date range. So from November the 25th to December the 23rd, the meter read this 32,000 and change, and then a month later it read 35,000. The delta is 2,677. So this customer used 2,677 kilowatt hours. Then Eversource say, well, we currently charge 18 cents a kilowatt hour for your electricity. That's the supplier cost, and you can go online and change supplier. If you don't like your supplier, you want to choose someone else, and Lincoln might use a town aggregator. So that's the cost of electricity portion up there. And then below that, you've got all the delivery charges, and you'll notice there's one $7 fixed customer charge. That $7 stays on your bill, whether you use 0 kilowatt hours or 10,000. All the rest are based on the number of kilowatt hours you use. And when you add up all of these, it's about 15 cents. So this homeowner is paying 32 cents per kilowatt hour. But I wanted to give you the tools to go to your bill and to look it up. And basically you can take this top line price. So with this customer, $868. If you want to subtract out the $7, so 861 divided by the number of kilowatt hours will give you a rate per kilowatt hour that you're paying the utility. Or you could just add up all these individual charges on your bill. When you go solar, this new usage reading is going to be based on your net usage. So if this homeowner had the space, and we did design a system that could generate 2,677 kilowatt hours, all these charges would be zeroed out. They would owe the utility $7 instead of 868. So that's net metering. You net out your usage, and it's a one-for-one cost offset. And here it's useful. You can see 13 months of kilowatt hour usage. All right. Moving on. Oh, here I just wanted to show this is a sample system of a real system I just pulled off one of our sites. Well, actually the usage is not real. This is 1,000. The gray represents their usage month to month to month to month, about 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. And then the green represents solar production over the course of the year. So you are going to see higher production nearly all the time in the summer months than you are in the winter. So had this system gone live January 1st, this homeowner would have owed the utility probably for 500 kilowatt hours of net usage. They used 1,000, but the solar made 500. February, they would have had another bill as well. But then coming into March, April, May, June, they're producing more than they use, and they get a credit from Eversource for that excess net metering credits. And those credits would roll over. So in this case, their summer credits could potentially take them through the winter. Down in October and November, when they start producing less than they use, the credits will carry into the winter months. And this is really important as homeowners shift to electric heat. You're going to see your winter usage go up. And if you have solar, your summer production's higher. So you need those credits to take you into the winter months. All right, nitty gritty. How much is this going to cost me? First off, it's important to understand the incentives. There's a 30% federal tax credit. Whether it's 10,000 or 100,000 that you spend on solar, it's the 30% tax credit. So if you spend 30,000, your tax credit's 9,000. So if you install it this year, next year when you file your taxes, you'd apply for that tax credit. And then there's a Massachusetts tax credit of $1,000. 15% up to 1,000, but you reach that 1,000 pretty quickly. Most people get the full 1,000. So I think I have an example, and I'm going to be as general and as broad as possible. It's a common question. How much does it cost? And I got to say, well, it really depends. Depends on a lot of factors, depends mostly on the size of the system. How many panels are you getting? 10 or are you getting 100? What equipment are we using? What's the steepness of the roof? How many different roof surfaces are we working on? Is it a rubber roof? Is it a metal roof? Is it a shingle roof? What's the state of the electrical infrastructure? I just got to preface this. There's a lot of what ifs. But roughly, very roughly, don't hold me to this. Don't have an installer come out and say, but Roy said it costs $4 a watt. But roughly now people are paying about $4 a watt, or using our example of the 400 watt panel, about $1,600 fully installed per panel. So, oh yeah, here's my table. Here's an example. A 10 kilowatt system, which is pretty typical. I think our average system size last year was somewhere between 35 and 40,000. So a typical 10 kilowatt system, which is about 25 of these panels that are 6 by 3 feet. So, you know, you got to make sure you got the roof surface area available for that first, is about 40,000. The federal tax credit, 30% of that would be 12,000. The state tax credit would be $1,000. So the after tax credit cost of the system comes in at about 27,000. Broad generalizations here. I know I keep saying this. The annual kilowatt hour generated is going to depend on a lot of things, tilt orientation. We went through that previously, but a 10 kilowatt system on a perfect site in Massachusetts could potentially generate 14,000 kilowatt hours. On a bad site, maybe 6,000 kilowatt hours. So you're going to see a broad range in what this system does for you, and it's site specific. But a lot of sites I'd say the average, so a 10 kilowatt will produce about 10,000 kilowatt hours. When you go solar, you're installing the equipment to make kilowatt hours that you no longer have to pay Eversource for those kilowatt hours. So in this case, if it's making 10,000 over the course of the year and your rate per kilowatt hour is 32 cents, it's saving you $3,200 annually. Monthly savings, $267. And I know there's a lot of numbers thrown around, so I'll leave that table up. But basically, if you wanted to finance that, and I just went online and just punched in a loan calculator, assuming a 15-year loan, 7% interest rate on 27,000 after tax portion, your monthly loan payments would be $243. So if you did this today and you had a reasonable site, you could replace $267 of electricity bill with a $243 loan payment. And you know those electricity bills are going to keep going up, but that loan payment should stay the same for that 15-year period. Anyway, broad generalizations. I just wanted to put it into context because I know people are going to ask, how much is it going to cost me? If your system's half the size, the cost should be about half as much. Do a 12-panel system. Certain economies of scale might be more like 25,000. I'm not going to spend too much time on storage. I know people get very excited about storage, but I wanted to focus more on the solar itself. Storage is a separate entity. I would compare storage with a generator. When we talk about solar, we talk about replacing something you're already paying for. So there's a definite payback period. With storage, it's more about peace of mind that your milk's not going to go bad. So I'd recommend storage if power outages are painful to you. If you just want it for the novelty and you have candles or you're on town water, it might not make sense. The storage is still expensive and limited in what it can do for you. But I'll spend a few minutes talking about it, but I don't want to spend too much time. The nice thing about storage is power goes out, you'll go to your battery. and you can power off your battery until the power comes back on. But it's limited. It's you'd have to look at the kilowatt hour capacity of your battery. If it's going to be a 5-day outage, you want to be really conservative. If the sun comes back out, I didn't specify that before. If you have grid tied solar only and the power goes out, you can't use your solar. If you add batteries, you can use your solar, and the solar can recharge the batteries, provided the sun comes out the following day. You can apply the 30% federal tax credit to storage, and you can participate in an additional program called the Connected Solutions Program, whereby you share your power with Eversource. Nice of you. And they compensate you for that during their peak demand events, normally really hot days in the summertime for very short periods of time, 2 to 3 hours. They'll discharge your battery and use that energy in other areas, but they'll compensate you for that. And it's a pretty generous program. And if anyone's had MassSave come out and talked about their heat loan program, it's a 7-year, 0% heat loan that can qualify for batteries as well. Batteries are still pretty expensive, but they do qualify for those 2 incentives, and they could create more independence. So if you're shopping around for a generator anyway, a battery could be a good alternative. We can do whole home backup solutions. I'm looking at my crystal ball here, and I'm predicting that in the next few years, we're going to see more and more electric vehicles acting like home backup solutions where you can plug your vehicle into your house. You can't drive it anywhere, but during a power outage, you can use your electric vehicle as a battery backup solutions. Typically, our backup solutions are between 10 and 20 kilowatt hours. Most electric vehicles have 60, 70, 80 kilowatt hour batteries in them. So we're a little bit limited right now in what we can do. The NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, has been reluctant to let us install huge battery systems, and probably rightly so, until they've been proven, and they want fire mitigation systems. So it ends up being a whole construction project to do any sizable battery backup. But that's not to say we can't do it. So to summarize and get on to the questions, probably talked far too much. Solar panels are a great way to help the environment and save money on your electric bill. And you could see savings between 6-10 years. If you have a lot of shading on your site, that might push it out into the teens of years. So it depends. If you factor in some interest rates on some loans, it push out a little bit further. But it's important to work with a reliable installer, someone who's recommended, to get a number of options, get 2 or 3 guys out there, or girls, sorry, 2 or 3 installers to give you their recommendations and figure out what it is you want to achieve. If you just want to put panels on the most efficient roof surfaces, that's fine. If you want to maximize the roof and get the most kilowatt hours possible and are willing to tolerate a slightly longer payback, that's fine as well. Just it's got to be customized to what you want to do. And that's all, folks.
Okay.
I guess I'll open it up to questions.
I think you've answered a lot of questions already. Oh, I have a question about the panels. I would like to, when I do this, I would like to get panels that were actually made in the United States, because I know some of them do come from China. And is that an option that you have with anybody, or just certain people? They're probably more expensive, but it's probably worth it. So do you have an option with each person you call, to come see what they can do, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's often not easy. There was an American manufacturer that recently went out of business. But it's not
Oh,
easy.
really? Where was that one?
I think it was Solar World, but I think they got purchased by someone, probably SunPower,
Okay.
out in Oregon.
Uh-huh.
It's often like one of our American manufactured panels is Hanwha Q-Cell. The parent company is Chinese, but they have a manufacturing facility in Georgia. So it's often difficult to sorry, shall I stop sharing this? I don't know what that is. It's not easy to sponsor both an American company and an American manufacturer. Like Canadian Solar is actually a Chinese company. Q-Cells are, the parent company is Chinese, but they do have manufacturing in the United States. So check with the installer. Ours, we use the Q-Cells, so we have Chinese parent company that has some manufacturing in Georgia, and then REC modules, which are Norwegian company manufacturing in Singapore.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Was that Edwina?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Shall I just look at the yellow hands?
Yeah, Susan, do you want to go?
Yes, I had a solar energy evaluation a bunch of years ago, and I'd have to cut down a bunch of trees in order to do it. So instead, I signed up for Lincoln Green Energy Choice, and this is really a question for the Green Energy Committee. Is that a good enough choice, or should I think about cutting down trees to do solar? You don't have to answer that. You can answer it offline, but I'm curious.
I could say that I've done the same thing, and I'm a member of the Green Energy Committee. Susan?
Okay.
Cutting down trees in Lincoln is a challenge because not only do they are they beautiful and they store carbon, but they also shade your house in the summer and reduce air conditioning loads. So the option for that in Lincoln, and this would be a question to the presenter as well, community shared solar is an opportunity that we have in Massachusetts to collectively get together and put together, say, a 100 kilowatt system someplace in Lincoln, and each have 10 kilowatts of that 100, and virtually net meter it to our individual homes from the production of the collective system. And that's something that's been in the back of my mind for some years now, but you know, it's kind of hard to figure out where in Lincoln we would want to sacrifice pristine land to put up solar panels. So roofs are ideal for that. You know, they're already there. So it is a conundrum.
Great, thank you.
I've also taken the philosophy that I don't want any large trees right next to my house. So I'm removing some of the large trees that might fall on my house and putting smaller trees that won't block the solar panels.
Yeah.
Jeannie?
Yeah, well, my question was kind of related actually, because some years ago, I had the same kind of assessment done, and I would say this is at least 10 years ago, with a lot of shade on a south-facing roof. And I've been wondering whether the increased efficiency of panels would have enough impact to make it worthwhile to reconsider or have another assessment done.
It's a good question. I think it's less about efficiency and more about electricity prices. That exact same system that someone quoted you 10 years ago, the cost of electricity might have been 10 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour, and today it's 40 to 45 cents a kilowatt hour. So maybe 10 years ago, someone was showing you a payback 20 years. So you can divide that by 3, and maybe your payback's 8 or 9 years now. So you might get the same amount of shading, but the value of the kilowatt hours you are making is much higher. So I've looked at quotes I've sent out 10 years ago, and we were using a 4 or 5% energy inflation to predict what the payback was going to be. And we were predicting that energy prices were going to be close to 20 cents a kilowatt hour today, and instead they're 40 cents a kilowatt hour. And it might be worthwhile taking trees down. I know it's not necessarily environmental, but if they pose a danger to the house, and in terms of cooling the property, you really want to look at shading trees to the east and the west when the sun is lower in the sky, because it's penetrating the windows to the east and the west. On the south facing, you don't necessarily want trees, and the sun's going to be higher in the sky, and the roof overhang should shade those windows from the roof. So I think it is worthwhile getting that reanalyzed. Sometimes it's obvious, it's 1 or 2 trees that are obvious offenders, or sometimes it's just a huge band of 20 or 30 trees, and then it's difficult to sort of encourage that sort of level of tree removal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I have a bunch of questions that were raised from somebody who's not on today, but if you have a tricky roof, do you send out an installation crew to help design the trickiness so the homeowner will know what it will look like and work out the kinks? And actually that's happened to other people on this call, that they had some issues that weren't resolved until the installation crew got out there, and it became a 4-month issue or so. So.
Oh, interesting. So I guess it'd be helpful to understand what is meant by a tricky roof in terms of obstructions and dormers and skylights.
I'm guessing rubber roofs, possibly thicker insulation on roofs, and possibly having panels in one place and another because of dormers or small chunks of roof.
Yeah, I mean, an experienced sales rep or site technician. Some companies will break that into multiple parts. They'll have a site designer, and then they'll have the sales rep, and then they'll have a site technician who will come out and take the measurements. What we do is we squash that all, and that's my job, and our sales guys do all of that. So they should be able to identify potential issues, and there's no issues really with doing a rubber roof. There can be some complexity if that rubber's directly, I think the sizes had a rubber roof, with having that rubber directly on top of the insulation rather than having sort of a plywood substrate on top of the insulation and then the rubber on top of that, so you can attach to the plywood. There can be, so there could be issues in terms of design issues and having arrays in several different locations. It's not really an issue, but it's nice to be able to hide the conduit. So if there's an attic space connecting the 2 roofs, you can make the penetration underneath the array go into the attic and hide the conduit or the wiring in the attic. So you don't see the metal. Most installers should be using what's called EMT, electrical metal tubing, to connect portions of the array that are outside, because it's weather resistant, but it just looks ugly on the roof. So there's always, it is still a construction project, and there could still be issues that we might not figure out until further along. But I'd say, in my experience, the biggest one with roof mounted systems is the need for structural reinforcing. And we do work with a structural engineer to try and figure out that as early in the process as we can.
You talked about how long the panels last. How long do the inverters last?
That's a good question as well. Enphase gives their inverters a 25-year warranty. So SolarEdge gives their inverters a 12-year warranty, but extendable to 25 years. We've only been around 16 years. We have seen more inverter or optimizer failure relative to panel failures. But I can't speak specifically. They're more likely to fail, but we've seen some systems lasting since we first installed them 16 years ago. But I'd say 15 years would be 50-50 for traditional string inverters, and the smaller inverters maybe more like 20 years, but they do have a 25-year warranty. So I see Edward's got his hand up.
Yeah, you in your economics, you did not talk about the SMART program, I don't believe. And Susan McGatt's question about buying 100% Class 1 RECs through the town's aggregation program does enable one to, in my view at least, to take the advantage of selling the RECs back to Eversource and then buying 100% electricity through the town's 100%, renewable electricity through the town's aggregation program. Did your economics include the SMART program?
They did not.
Okay, could you speak to that?
The SMART, short answer is SMART's not available anymore. Long answer is the way SMART got allocated is per utility, like slices of a pie, and each block got allocated at a certain time. And as Eversource chewed through that block, the next block opened up at a slightly lower rate. And we've reached a point where the value of the SMART is basically non-existent. I think it's currently 1 cent per kilowatt hour. So for the additional costs of installing a monitoring system and a meter that can report that production, which probably adds about $1,000 to the project, it doesn't cover the additional cost of the SMART, unfortunately.
Well, that shows how out of date I am. I think we were getting, when we did the first parish with about 20 kilowatts, I think we're getting something on the order of 13 cents a kilowatt hour from the SMART program.
Yeah.
No longer, I guess.
Sorry. It worked well. National Grid chewed through their blocks quicker than Eversource. But with the rising electricity prices, people just bought it up quicker than they expected. And that's just to clarify, SMART gets allocated in different sizes as well. So we fall under the smaller than 25 kilowatt systems. If you're doing a larger system, there may still be SMART available for small commercial, large commercial, and utility scale. Our bucket is just full.
Yep, understood.
Yeah. And you talked a little bit about the RECs. There are still RECs, renewable energy certificates, available with the state, where you're basically selling the right to call your electricity green. And I think those are about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So you can still qualify for those, but it doesn't really earn you much benefit. Let's say $200 a year for that example 10 kilowatt system we looked at.
That's it. If you sold the RECs directly to someone else, you're saying?
Yeah, you can work with a broker to sell RECs.
Nancy?
Hi, sorry, my video's not working currently. I wondered if you could discuss a little bit about, for example, if one needs to redo the roof, prior to the solar install. Is there one kind of roof? There are so many new materials that is better. It sounds like obviously a rubber roof is not, and you wouldn't do that on a pitch anyway. But the new metal or the plastic, whatever the different materials.
Yeah. I mean, asphalt shingles are so ubiquitous, the installers are so familiar with them that you can't really go wrong with installing on an asphalt shingle roof. So general recommendations, if you stick with asphalt shingles, I'd recommend removing everything. I don't think any roofing contractors still do this where they add multiple layers of shingles on, but you still see it on older houses where the roofing contractor, instead of taking the existing layer of shingles off, will just add the next layer of shingles on top.
Right.
Talk to your roofing contractor once they've taken all the shingles off, whether they want to do ice and water just for the first 6 feet. Some people choose to do it over a bigger section of the roof, and that's the material that's like neoprene, so it gives you a little bit better seal where you've got all the nail heads poking through in your attic. Some people choose to, I think by code, it only needs to be done in the first 6 feet up from the gutter, but some people choose to have it done on the whole roof. And we love installing on metal standing seam roofs because we can clamp directly to the standing seam metal and we don't have to make any roof penetrations. But you're probably going to pay about 3 times as much for a standing seam metal roof than you are for a asphalt shingle roof.
Oh, okay, that's good to know.
But check.
Yeah, and does the level of insulation in the attic matter? I mean, other than the obvious that it would with or without solar.
Does it matter in terms of how we install the system?
Right, and or how it functions. I mean, the solar itself, not obviously you're retaining heat in your home.
No, I mean,
Okay.
a nice thing about adding solar, I've been on quite a few roofs, and if I go up there in the summer months, I can barely touch a hot black shingle roof for more than a second without burning my hand. And when the solar panels are on there, they basically act like a big awning, so they'll keep the shingles a little cooler. Your attic should stay a little bit cooler, and it could potentially lower your air conditioning loads. But in terms of the amount of insulation in the attic, it's not going to have any effect. Obviously, more insulation is better for heating and cooling loads within the house.
And one more, if I may. I noticed with the little series of storms we had, which was very close to freezing mark and wet and heavy, that solar panels in the area didn't clear for several days from the snow that was sitting on them. And is there I know there are roof rakes for your roof, but is there anything you should do? In other words, how does the snow affect, obviously, solar absorption and producing the kilowatt?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, snow covering the solar panels is going to significantly reduce production. Some little tricks of the trade. What you'll often see is the solar panels will shed the snow and then it'll hit the shingle roof and stop. So if you keep the solar panels close to the gutter, it'll slide right off the roof a lot better. And generally, I've seen the opposite where if it's around 30 degrees and the snow starts melting and all, the solar panels will shed it very quickly. Whereas when it's really cold out in the teens and it snows, the snow will just stay on the panels for longer. But obviously a steeper roof pitch will shed it quicker than a more shallow pitch. We can't necessarily recommend people use roof rakes to clear the snow because it could void the warranty of the panels. But I know they do make the rubber roof rakes. And if you are desperate, don't tell me, but you could do that.
Okay, thank you.
Ed?
Yeah, I have another question for Roy. What are you mentioned putting the panels right to the very edge of the roof. In some places, you don't want avalanches falling off your roof. So, for example, again, at the First Parish, we've put on devices that keep the snow from avalanching off and onto the kids that are going into the nursery school underneath. But the question is, what are the rules nowadays, the codes with respect to taking solar panels all the way to the edges of the roof? Isn't there some requirement that you be able to walk around the array on a roof?
That's a great question, Ed. Obviously, if it's a liability issue, like for instance, we did a system in Concord, Woods Hill Kitchen, and there's a sidewalk directly below it. So we installed some snow guards on that system. It keeps the snow on the panels a little bit longer, reduces your production, but it keeps people safe from not getting a ton of snow dropped on their heads. There's some recommendations. So generally over front doors and doorways, it's recommended to have a snow guard system. So it could just be that portion of the array that has the snow guards on them. And then there are separate potential, this is ongoing discussions. They haven't been implemented yet, but they might be implemented, setback and passageways for firefighters who, if your house is on fire and they need to vent it, normally on the top part of the ridge of the roof, so they need a way to climb up there. They're trying to enforce some setback requirements. I think it's 18 inches from the ridge of the roof, so not the lower edge, but also a 3-foot passage from some portion of that roof to the peak of the roof so that they can access that. There's a lot of exceptions. For example, if there's 2 roofs and you can access it from the other side, there might be an exception there. If there are hips and valleys that you can walk up. So it's not clear cut, but it's ongoing discussion. And I think a metal roof is exempt from that. So maybe it's worth 3 times the price. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, one other point about snow cover. The bad thing is it covers the panels. The mitigating factor is that during January and February, you don't get that much sunlight. And so you're not really losing that much power generation. I once did a study with some graduate students on what would be the budget for getting snow off the roof. I mean, how much should you be willing to spend to get snow off your roof? Now, this was done up in Hanover, New Hampshire. And it was infuriating for the poor kids that were trying to design the system to do it because their budget was almost nothing. So, snow cover is bad, but in January, there's not that much sun. You don't lose much.
I did the same thing. People ask about pollen covering their system, and there was not a noticeable difference. We do some small commercials where it's a very low tilt, 5-10% on a flat rubber roof. And there's no one up there clearing the roofs. You don't lose a lot. Don't worry about it. I haven't touched my solar panels in years and they're still doing their thing.
Stefan has a question. Did you want to ask it?
Sure. Hi, I was wondering, I have about a 12 pitch roof and I'm going to build a garage, and I'm just trying to design the best pitch for the garage to carry solar panels. So I've heard that there's different angles for winter and summer. What is the best degree application for either winter or summer?
36 degrees.
Very good.
But it doesn't matter that much if you're 20 or 45. So whatever that is, a 4 pitch or 12 pitch, you're going to be 2 or 3% difference. It doesn't make a huge. Design it how you're comfortable with doing it. But if you want to be perfect, 36 degrees. We're at 42 degrees latitude. So a lot of people think, well, it should be a 42-degree roof.
That's why I put that in the question. I read that somewhere. It was 42.
Yes, but it's weighted more towards summer production. To Edward's point, there's less winter production, so you want to favor a slightly, we're getting into the weeds, we want to favor a slightly lower pitch, so
Great.
36.
36 it is. Thank you.
I just posted in the chat a very, very useful tool from NREL for doing those kind of calculations.
Thanks, Ed.
I had a question about the the payment schedule. And when should the last payment be made to make sure that the system's working well?
So paying your installer
Yes, yes.
upfront cash. No, I'm just kidding. It's a really good question because most installers do make most of their money installing these systems and then will disappear when it's time to do anything service related with it. So I'd recommend insisting on some sort of holdback. So you could see the installation happen right now. A lot of installers are 5, 6, 7 months out because there's a huge demand. So you could see that installation happening 5 months from now. And especially Eversource, there could potentially still be a 4 to 6 week period, could be longer, from installation completion to when you get what we call PTO, permission to operate, because the system needs to be inspected by the building inspector, needs to be inspected by the wiring inspector in town, and then the meter needs to be replaced by Eversource. And in the winter, they're very slow. The summer, they're slightly better. And so making sure those inspections are completed and holding back that final payment until after PTO, permission to operate, is a good recommendation, whether it's 5% or 10% of the total project costs. It's sort of motivation because it can be tough to get inspectors out there sometimes. I'm sure the Lincoln inspector is wonderful, but just so the installers keep tapping him on the shoulder, say, can you please inspect this? Can you please inspect this? So not doing that final payment until it's 100% completed is.
And online with Eversource
Oh,
or before, after the inspector, but before Eversource, since that's 4 more weeks.
you will get a letter from Eversource saying that you have permission to. If you're happen to be home, you'll see the tech come up and replace your meter. That's literally the final step. And normally within 24 hours of that happening, they send you an email saying you have permission to operate your system. So after that, I would say it doesn't have to be a lot, but just withholding that final payment.
Great. Those are all the questions. Does anyone have any last questions? Well, this was a great talk.
Yeah, this was great. Roy, thank you so much. So I think we're going to wind up our hour. I encourage anyone with questions to visit our website or to send us emails, and we'll see if we can get you answers. I also encourage you, if you're interested, to join us on March 30th to take in the presentation that we're doing with FOMA on retrofitting the historical home. So thank you very much for your time, everyone. And Roy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yep.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all the good technical questions.
Thank you. All right,
Take care. Bye.
you too. Bye-bye.